By the turn of the century, as Irish groups in Montreal struggled to reconcile their fidelity to the famine site and their frustrations with its monumental marker, the Grand Trunk Railway, in a bid to expand land in the southwest of the city, went ahead and moved the stone several blocks west to St. Patrick's Square in Griffintown. An object once promising permanence, the stone now stood bereft of the site it was meant to preserve. This was a transformative moment for the famine site, as the railway's heist had the effect of suddenly generating an unprecedented amount of affection for the Black Stone. Though some Irish Catholics in the city had themselves at one point advocated moving the monument or constructing one deemed more authentically Irish, the boulder now gained a legitimacy as a memorial to the martyrs of 1847 and a new salience as a symbol of the indignities suffered by their descendants a half-century later. As part of the lobbying effort to pressure the railway to return it to its rightful place, the stone was recast as a famine memorial of national significance. In 1901, the True Witness and Catholic Chronicle, which just 4 years earlier had looked askance at the boulder, described it as, quote, a national monument, end quote. Prominent figures in the Irish community, such as J.J. Garand, future mayor of Montreal, agreed, insisting that, quote, the Irish throughout Canada, from Sarnia to Halifax, were indignant at this violent spoliation, end quote. Joseph Regan, national president of the AOH, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, went a step further by declaring the monument an emblem of the Irish race. For such ardent Irish nationalists, the stone had become ideologically charged. Not only was it a powerful reminder of the famine tragedy, it now also stood as a symbol of the political struggle of the city's Irish Catholics to protect an important landmark, a rare, if rudimentary, symbol of the place of Irish Canadians in the cultural landscape of Montreal. Yet, despite the protestations of politicians, newspapers, and representatives from each of the 5 Irish parishes of Montreal, it wasn't until 1912, after the Railway Board of Commissioners in Ottawa adjudicated the matter, that the railway was legally compelled to return the monument to its original site. In the time it had taken for Irish Montrealers to reinvent the beleaguered Black Stone as a cherished Irish famine memorial and oversee its return, the locus of famine commemoration in Quebec had shifted to Grosse Ile, where a Celtic cross was erected by the Ancient Order of Hibernians. The organizers of the dedication ceremony in August 1909, which drew 8,000 people to the island from across Canada and the U.S., were well aware of the removal of Montreal's monument and were determined to ensure that no such desecration would be repeated. If Montreal's stone was, as the 1909 commemorative booklet dismissed it, a monument standing wide of the mark, Grosse Ile's cross hit the spot as, quote, a proper and lasting national memento, end quote. While the various participants in the 1909 dedicatory ceremonies ascribed a range of political and historical meanings to the events of 1847, as reflected in the inscriptions in Gaelic, English, and French on the panels at the base of the memorial, the Celtic cross was widely recognized as a distinguished Irish Catholic famine memorial, one that would indelibly mark the Irishness of a famine gravesite in ways that Montreal's primitive rock never could. Though commemorative activity on Grosse Ile in the decades that followed was limited by the island's operations as a quarantine station and then as a research base for experimental bacteriological weaponry during the Second World War, the island's 46-foot cross had eclipsed Montreal's stone as Quebec's dominant famine memorial. Other than receiving annual visitations by small groups of Hibernians, the Montreal stone was a relatively lonely landmark surrounded by the busy network of railroad yards, sheds, and tracks of Point St. Charles. However, a grisly discovery in the area in 1942 briefly renewed Irish Catholics' sense of ownership of the monument. Workers engaged in the excavation of a tunnel in the vicinity of the stone unearthed the remains of 12 typhus victims from 1847. The inadvertent exhumation reinforced Irish Catholic claims to the stone monument. In conjunction with the CNR and Anglican authorities, the AOH, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, the St. Patrick's Society, and the United Irish Societies organized a ceremony in November 1942 at which the remains would be reinterred next to the Black Stone. Though both Catholic and Anglican religious services were held, the speeches delivered during the ceremony reaffirmed the sanctity of the site and its memorial for Irish Catholics in the city. Dr. L.P. Nelligan, past president of St. Patrick's Society, urged those in attendance to look upon the stone as, quote, symbolic of the abiding strength and faith of Irish Catholics, whose tragic passing in 1847 served to build a great nation, end quote. Thus, Irish groups involved in the reinterment reimagined the Montreal Monument as a symbol of the foundational role of Irish Catholics as Canadian pioneers and patriots. Though the surge of interest generated by the 1942 ceremony helped further entrench the stone as an integral part of the memorial site, the Famine Centenary just 5 years later failed to draw much notice. Montreal's Famine Memorial was not even deemed a worthy alternative to Groseil's Celtic Cross. When in September 1947 the Canadian government cancelled a 1,000-person pilgrimage to the cross due to concerns about environmental conditions on the island, Quebec's AOH overlooked the Black Stone and redirected the pilgrimage to Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré, a popular Catholic shrine but a site of no relevance to the 1847 migration. The following year, the Hibernians in Montreal did finally organize their own small commemorative event marking the Famine Centenary, at which the Black Stone was likened to the Treaty Stone of Limerick and celebrated for, quote, its air of solemnity that strikes the observer more forcibly than the grandeur of sculptural granite or mounted bronze, end quote. But this grandiose description of the boulder belies Hibernians' disappointment with Irish Catholics in the city, who remained reluctant to rediscover, quote, the wealth of story, romantic, tragic, heroic, and inspiring, end quote, that the stone was thought to represent. In the 2 decades following the Famine Centenary, the Black Stone appeared increasingly derelict amidst the industrial debris of Point St. Charles, as many Irish Catholics moved away from working-class neighborhoods in the city's southwest. However, it was not long before Montreal's Famine Monument was made conspicuous anew. In 1965, as urban redevelopment in preparation for Expo 67 threatened to topple the stone from its pedestal, an Irish Stone Committee was struck to protest its proposed removal. After 9 months of negotiations with the city, the Anglican bishop, and the CN Railway, a solution was reached that solved the city's traffic issues while leaving the stone unturned. Rather than altering the memorial site, Bridge Street, which is adjacent to the stone, was divided as a thoroughfare that would pass on either side of a central dividing mall where the monument would remain.